This is not a dream, not a dream. We are using your brain's perceptual system as a receiver. We are unable to transmit through conscious neural interference. You are receiving this broadcast as a dream. We are transmitting from the year 3999. You are receiving this broadcast in order to alter the events you are seeing. Our technology has not built the transmitter strong enough to reach your conscious state of awareness. But this is not a dream. You are seeing what is actually occurring. For the purpose of causality violation, this broadcast will be received by the perceptual centers as a dream. But this is not a dream.
Another way of talking about the web is that there are different levels of magnification. For example, supposing you take a piece of embroidery, an ordered and beautiful object. Then you take out a microscope and you look at the individual threads. At a certain point, as you turn up the microscope, you'll get a hopeless tangle, which doesn't make any sense at all. The wrapped fiber that constitutes the thread is a mess. Hasn't been organized, nobody did anything about it. But at the level of magnification at which you actually see it with the naked eye, it's all been organized. All right, now keep turning up that microscope. Take one of those individual threads in the fiber that seems to be so chaotic and go into the constitution of that. And again, you'll find fantastic order. You'll find the most gorgeous designs of molecules. Then keep turning it up, and again at a certain level you'll find chaos again. All right, keep going, and at another level you'll find this marvelous order. Now you see, order and randomness constitute, in other words, the warp and the woof. Where everything is in order, everything's under control. In randomness, it's a mess. But we wouldn't know what order was unless we had messes. It's the contrast of order and messes that order itself depends upon. And so in this exactly the same way, it is the contrast of on and off, there and not there, being and non-being. In other words, life and death, that constitutes existence. Only we pretend that the random side of things, the disorderly side of things, could possibly win in the game of competition, or I would rather call it collaboration between the two. When you lose sight of the fact that the order principle and the random principle go together, that's exactly the same predicament as losing sight of the fact that all individually delineated things and beings are connected underneath. Just like mountains stick out of the earth, so all of us as different things, we stick out of reality. And there's a continuity underneath, but you ignore that, you see. That's the thing that's left out. But really, deep down, we are, each one of us, everything that there is. Doing it this way, and then again that way, and then again another way. And that's what it keeps up doing forever and ever. Only, it has holidays, which are called deaths. There must be that interval. And it exists on all kinds of levels. When you listen to music, you hear a melody. But what you hear, actually, that makes the melody significant are the steps between the tones. What we call the intervals. So, that interval between whatever happens is as important as what happens.
So, are you someone who's really good at looking at the micro and the macro? I mean, if you're in the working environment, do your thoughts go toward conventional society, and then at different times you're involved in something very specific?
Well, yes. Yeah, of course, the older I get, the more macro it gets. I need reading glasses at this point. But as far as widening and narrowing my scope, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes I have to take a big picture view. Other times I'm looking more at the details. You've always got to try to achieve an interplay between those two extremes.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've heard it said by you that a good example of someone with a very high intellect, such as yours, is that you're able to hold in your mind at one time many different scenarios in all of the processes that they are involved in at one time. Is that sort of safe to say where your expertise really shows itself?
Well, I don't know if you could call that expertise. It's something about it says something about neural capacity.
Your ability.
Well, yeah. In a manner of speaking, you're just holding certain things. That you're running certain mental processes simultaneously. I don't want to call it multitasking because the tasks aren't independent. They're all interrelated around one central theme or concept. And all of these things have to go on in your mind simultaneously, otherwise you're forgetting things that you need to know in order to run these other processes. So, in a holistic way, yes, this is what's happening.
Is that anything like predictive software, where you can create a model and play out different scenarios?
Well, models involve varying degrees of parallelism. Some models are highly parallel, which means they have a number of sub-processes running simultaneously, and other models are more or less sequential. They follow one step after another. It really kind of varies with whatever kind of problem you're working on.
Yeah, I imagine so. Well, okay, the reason I ask you about the micro and macro is because I'm wondering, in all that you take in, and you're able to see, everyday life, you've probably, been inundated with television and media just like the rest of us. What have you discovered that is untrue, that the average person might accept as reality?
Well, there are a number of examples. I suppose a lot of people think that things actually move from one point in space to another, but if you know anything about relativity theory, for example, you know that whenever you're looking outside yourself, you're actually looking into the past. Which means that whatever you see with your eyes, whatever is outside your body, that has already happened. And since everything has already happened outside yourself, nothing can really move from one point to another outside you. So it's all, in a sense, happening internally. When something moves, when states transform one into the other, this is happening in a dynamic realm that you're not necessarily seeing or perceiving with your eyes. That's one common way in which people are kind of misled by their senses.
So you're saying when something moves, it's not the thing moving, it's your mind?
Not exactly. What I'm saying is that there is a theater, there's a wider reality, one part of which can be called outward or physical, and the other of which can be called mental, and that most of the dynamics in that system, most of the change, is actually happening in the mental aspect of the system.
So if I'm on a highway and a tractor-trailer goes by me at 75 miles an hour, where in my concept of reality am I wrong to think that it was actually moving by me and now it's gone?
Well, the tractor is approaching you from the future, right? It's not. There's a sense in which the tractor is not really the truck, whatever it is that you're passing, is not actually outside you. Each state of the truck that you perceive as each moment passes is in a sense brand new. In other words, it's being determined at the present time. Now, some things are deterministic, which means that they project themselves into this mental realm an arbitrary distance. They have a world line that penetrates far into this realm. And in that case, you can kind of say, well, okay, they might as well be outside me because their trajectory has been determined by laws of physics. But those laws of physics are actually acting in an internal realm, in a sense. As I said, once you perceive something outside yourself, it's already in the past. Light has to travel from the event to your eyes, and that means that it has already happened. It's out there in your past. So when you see something, it's already pastward.
Oh,
that means that,
okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying, and we're talking in such a small fraction of time, but you're saying even the smallest amount of delay puts it in the past. Therefore, everything is in the past because everything that enters into your sight has to involve light bouncing off of it.
Right. In other words, there's something called observer participation. When you perceive an event outside yourself, in a sense, you're helping to generate that event.
Okay.
This is well known to people who are interested in quantum mechanics.
I wanted to make one comment on your very nice essays on meaning. If there is an answer to that question, what is the meaning of meaning, it's quite simply experience or involvement. But that means that in order to experience anything, you have to relate it to something. Meaning is a relationship. It's not just an input, or like some classified meaning out of a dictionary. It means having some idea of how that word works in an actual situation. You relate it to other things than just its own isolated, classified meaning. You hear it, you feel it, you live it, you experience it. Experience is a relationship. It is not an isolated event. So the meaning of meaning is just simply involvement is relating things to things and not just classifying isolated meanings such as you get in a dictionary. Many of you got that. A very large proportion of your answers were in favor of the dictionary classified meaning as meaning. But most of you, I think, settled for the idea of experience as the meaning of meaning. But the mere fact that people in this age ask what is the meaning of meaning indicates that we're living in a very strange time indeed.
Inquire, if you're not too tired, what is thinking? Probably nobody has asked this question. Very few people do. Don't wait for me to answer it. Look at it. Observe it. Thinking is part of memory, isn't it? Investigate it with the speaker, please. Don't sit there comfortably or uncomfortably. Thinking is part of memory, isn't it? If you had no memory at all, would you be able to think? You wouldn't. Our brain is the instrument of memory. Memory of things that have happened, experience and so on, the whole background of memory. The psyche, which is the me, and the me is the image I have built about myself. There is nothing spiritual about it. That's another ugly word, spiritual. Experience, knowledge, memory, and the response of memory is thought. Experience is always limited, naturally. Because it's a complicated question, because, oh gosh, everything is complicated. Is experience different from the experiencer? Give your brains to me, find out. If there is no experiencer, is there an experience? Of course not. So the experience and the experiencer are the same. Like the observer and the observed. The thinker is not separate from his thoughts. The thinker is the thought. When you see this fact, this actuality, just to observe it in yourself, not move away from the reality of it, from the truth of it, to hold it, to remain in it, not run away from it, not rationalize it is so. And then it's like holding a precious jewel in your hand. See all the beauty of that jewel. Then you'll see for yourself that fear psychologically completely ends. And when there is no fear, you're free.
Well, take us into the Bohmian view of how we may look at these and deal with these real profound paradoxes or dilemmas.
Yeah, well, the way I started was that one could see that relativity and quantum theory, the two most fundamental theories of matter, really contradict each other in the sense that relativity is, is local, it's causal, it's determinate, it's continuous, and quantum mechanics is just the opposite. It's non-causal, it's non-continuous, it has discrete jumps, but things not passing through the intermediate space, and it's non-local. It has these peculiar properties, electrons connected at long distances. So with that absolute contradiction of the two basic theories, I said we could try to find out what they had in common. Now what they have in common is what I call undivided wholeness. You see, the view of relativity which Einstein was pursuing was that that there's only a general field. Particles are concentrated regions of field which spread out through the universe and merge with others. So the particle is an abstraction, according to Einstein. There's only a whole field which is undivided, right?
All right.
And that's the undivided wholeness is what characterizes that theory. Now, quantum mechanics, in a very different way, comes to the same thing, because it says energy exists in the form of indivisible quanta, and the entire movement of the universe is made up of unbreakable, indivisible links, you see, and that they're, which include the observer and the observed. See, it includes us as well as the atom we're looking at. And so relativity and quantum theory both agree on that. So I said that would be the starting point, to start from the whole and to say the parts are abstractions from the whole. They have no independent existence. Now, I think you can get a simple image of that if you look in water and see a whirlpool or a vortex. See, it looks like an entity, but it isn't. It's nothing but a constant pattern of movement in the water. If you put another whirlpool in, the two penetrate each other, merge, and produce one new pattern. They do not produce two separate whirlpools interacting. And we want to say the atoms, suppose the atoms are that way. That's a very rough picture, but it's, you know, it gives you an idea. The electrons, the protons, the entire universe is built that way.
Well, I'm really struggling to hang on to this, because I can understand at the level of the particles that physicists study.
Yeah.
And maybe even constructing matter like this chair or you and me, that there is this interconnection. But what about the vast spaces of outer space that connect various bodies in the heavens? Are you implying?
No, that too, yes.
That too?
Yes, to say that as the field spreads, you can see immediately the field spreads. See, light is also carried by this field, so the entire universe is connected through that field. Electric fields, light, you know, various forces are carried, gravitational forces. And so that space is merging with matter. Matter, in that view, is a certain property of that space, which is a bit more concentrated or something.
Okay, but you implied there that there is a wholeness.
Yes.
And yet it seems to me that certainly I have the conceit to think that I'm an individual, that I have my own uniqueness and individuality, and I run around, and that what I do here has no real connection with anyone else.
Well, that's an abstraction. You see, if you just think a little while, you'll see it can't be true what you've said. You see, you're surrounded by air, water, and so on. And if you were not surrounded in that way, it wouldn't last very long. Now, also you're surrounded by people who feed you and keep you alive, and also give communications which keep your mind going. And a person totally isolated would never even be human, you know, right?
Abstraction, you see. If you just think a little while, you'll see it can't be true what you've said. You see, you're surrounded by air, water, and so on. And if you were not surrounded in that way, it wouldn't last very long. Now, also you're surrounded by people who feed you and keep you alive, and also give communications which keep your mind going. And a person totally isolated would never even be human, you know, right?
Now, so I think just a little observation shows that that view is not really true, that at best it holds as an abstraction. You know, now, also materially, see, if you take waves passing up through a pond, they pass right through each other, right, as if there weren't any. But if you put a rock in there, you see the rock scatters the waves, so the waves would show up that rock. They wouldn't show each other up, right? Now, when we think of empty space as carrying matter and waves, and insofar as this movement passes through without deflection, we would say that that's what we mean by emptiness. You see, it doesn't necessarily mean that space is empty, but merely matter and waves of light and various things pass through it. Now, there's an interesting thing in physics. If you take a metal which is made of atoms, and they may be in a crystal form or very regular, at absolute zero of temperature, these atoms are in a perfect order. And if you pass electrons through, you can show they don't deflect, right? They go right through. Now, if you raise the temperatures, you get some irregularities. Now, if you were to pass electrons through the metal and use them to make an electron microscope, they would not show up the metal, they would only show up the irregularities apparently existing independently. Is that clear?
Yes.
I think that this sort of analogy gives some idea of what I mean, that that all these things which seem to exist independently are merely manifestations of something much deeper. And it's like the iceberg, as they say, the top of the iceberg, only far more so.
Okay, now let's take where you've led us so far, and as I say, I'm barely hanging on, I think.
that implies that this notion that we go about our everyday lives with thinking of ourselves as separate from each other, and the cup is separate from the coffee that goes in the cup, that these notions are somehow, what would you say, superficial or contradicted at a deeper level?
They're artificial, definitely, and Bohm really stresses this, and it's a very interesting notion, because in our Western way of thinking, we're so attached to the idea that when we come up with a concept like an apple or an electron or whatever, that exists out there, and we forget, it's kind of like fish unaware of the water in which they swim, that the conceptual pigeonholes we use, words, to describe reality, are phenomena inside our head. They're not out there. And most of the time this is a philosophical quibble, but when you get down to quantum physics, and this is one of the reasons that Bohm came up with the holographic idea, it starts to have real effects. And one of those is it's been discovered that if you take two subatomic particles like electrons, that in certain instances, when you do something to one, it will always affect the other, no matter how far apart they are. It's kind of like stories that you've heard of identical twins, where when one is hurt, the other feels the pain. And the problem is that we can find no process known to physics that explains how these could be sending a signal back and forth. In fact,
because it would have to be faster than the speed of light.
Instantaneous. It would have to be an instantaneous signal, and Einstein's theory of relativity said you can't have instantaneous signals, because it would mean that you could violate the time barrier and conceivably call your grandfather and tell him not to marry your grandmother. And most physicists say, well, this would be just too troubling to incorporate into a rational picture of reality. Bohm explains it in a different way, which is a very interesting way, and he says, if you imagine that you've got an aquarium in which you have a fish swimming, you have a TV camera facing the front of the aquarium, one facing the side of the aquarium, and you have a monitor attached to each camera. Now you also imagine further that you come from a culture that's never seen aquariums, never seen fish, never seen monitors or cameras. All you are privy to is the two images on these screens. He says that maybe, if you look at these two screens, you're going to see a side view of a fish and a frontal view of a fish. And because you don't know what the deeper reality is, the reality of the aquarium, you may assume that these are two separate things. But
two different fish.
Two different fish, two different objects. But every time one fish moves, the other is going to make a corresponding movement. And you may then jump to the conclusion that somehow the one fish is signaling the other or communicating the other to say, hey, do this, instantaneously. And Bohm says this is what we've done with subatomic particles, that we assume that an instantaneous communication is going on when that's not really what's going on at all. At a deeper level, a very holographic level of reality, every particle in the universe collapses to a sort of cosmic unity. They're not signaling each other. They're like that fish where there's the level of the aquarium. And so what that means, talking about words, is that there is no separation between electrons. Furthermore, there's no separation between people. And this has all kinds of very boggling implications, one of which is that we've always tried to understand, for example, psychic phenomena, like how could I get information out of your head in my head, as some sort of signal going back and forth. But if we're organized, if we live in a universe that's organized holographically, you no longer have to tackle it that way. It could be that I have the entire universe and every neuron, every cell, every atom, every electron in my head, and you do also. So when we can access that, we can access information that seems to be beyond our normal sensory reach.
Well, I'm very interested in psychic phenomenon, and I know you've had many personal experiences, and I want to touch on it, but this is not a model that was developed in order to explain psychic phenomenon. I think to neuropsychologists like Carl Pribram, the fact that it happens to provide an explanation for psychic phenomena is almost a bit of an embarrassment, that he developed the holographic model because he was trying to come to terms with memory.
Right.
So let's talk about that.
Sure. Pribram was working under a very famous neurophysiologist named Carl Lashley, and it was at a time when it was believed that memory was stored in a specific spot in the brain, and there was something called the proverbial grandmother cell, that there was literally a cell in your brain that contained the memory of your grandmother, of what you knew about your grandmother. And so they did a rather gruesome series of experiments for animal lovers, but it came out with some very profound information. They took rats and they taught them how to run mazes. And then they would surgically remove various portions of the brain, Pribram and his mentor, Carl Lashley. The reasoning being that if they could remove a portion of the brain and the rat could no longer run the maze, they'd found the area of the brain where the rat's memory of the maze running ability was encoded. Now, every time they removed a different portion of the brain, they discovered that they could never remove the memory of how to run the maze. They could impair the rat's ability so it might limp through the maze, but they couldn't remove it. And really, surgeons had known this for a while, doctors had known this for a while, because when people have head injuries, they don't forget half of the alphabet or half of their family or half of a novel they've read. They have global memory impairment where their entire memory may be hazy. But memories don't seem to be stored in our heads in the same way that books are stored on a shelf.
Morphic resonance is a connection across time from the past to the present. And it's a process that occurs between organized patterns of activity on the basis of similarity. What it means, in effect, is that each species has a kind of collective memory. So every giraffe tunes in by morphic resonance to the form and to the behavior of previous giraffes. Every crystal, as it crystallizes, tunes in to the way that previous crystals of the same chemical crystallized in the past. So there's a kind of memory given by morphic resonance in all kinds of things. And in the realm of animal behavior, for example, it leads to quite striking predictions. If rats learn a new trick here in London, then rats all around the world should be able to learn the same trick quicker, just because the rats have learned it here. The more that learn it, the easier it should get everywhere else. And there's already evidence that this actually happens from studies of rats in laboratories. When lots of rats have learned something, other rats all around the world find it easier to learn. And this doesn't depend on any normal kind of connection between the different rats or the places. It happens because of morphic resonance on the basis of similarity. The same applies to crystals. When a new chemical is made for the first time, it's usually very hard to crystallize it. And as time goes on, it gets easier to crystallize all around the world. And I think the reason for this is that morphic resonance connects up the crystals so they tune into a kind of collective memory. So morphic resonance works through morphic fields, the organizing fields of chemicals and biological systems. And the word morphic comes from the Greek word for form. So it's a kind of resonance to do with form, pattern, and organization.
And it wasn't until the 60s when Pribram encountered the holographic model that says that the whole is contained in every part that he said, aha, this may be what's going on in the brain. Specifically, because a hologram is made out of interference patterns, the hologram that you see, that we talked about earlier is made out of the interference pattern of laser light, but it can be made out of the interference patterns of any kind of energy, electromagnetic energy, electricity, X-rays even. And so Pribram said, since our synapses are constantly giving off electrical impulses, these are like proverbial pebbles dropping into the sort of electromagnetic pool of our brain. They're sending out ripples that are constantly crisscrossing. And he believes that's what the brain hologram, that's how we think and how we remember is through that hologram inside the head.
It would apply in another sense, too, because if you take a hologram image and cut it in half or in quarters or in tenths, each time you reduce it in size, the image becomes fuzzier and fuzzier, even though the whole image is there, just the way memory would seem to be. And
it becomes fuzzier when you have portions of the brain removed.
Yeah.
Correct.
And Pribram then also noticed that the same principle applied for visual information processing.
Well, yes, it's very interesting. He did not make the discovery, but he came upon the research done by other investigators. And that is another very interesting thing. As you know, Mother Nature uses all kinds of mathematical languages. When we go to understand physical phenomena, we generally find that there's some sort of mathematical underpinning to whatever the phenomena is. There are uncountable mathematical languages. It turns out that the mathematical language involved in the making of a hologram is a system of mathematics developed by a Frenchman named Fourier. They're called Fourier transforms. Well, it also turns out that our brain uses Fourier transforms to translate visual information. And this is a very unusual state of affairs. It's kind of like discovering Eskimos speaking Spanish. It's not proof that the brain is a hologram, but it's suggestive that the brain is a hologram. And it turns out, in fact, all of our senses appear to rely on sort of Fourier transforms, that they all seem to use the same mathematics. So again, here's evidence that the brain uses the same mathematics to decipher the sensory world as are involved in the making of a hologram, which is, as I say, not proof, but compelling evidence that something is going on there.
Well, what this seems to suggest is a new way of looking at consciousness itself.
Very much so, yeah. It's an interesting thing. I have to say that I differ a little with Pribram, because Pribram thinks that the brain, as I said, that it's the electrical interference patterns in the brain. It is a brain hologram. I'm kind of a mystic because, you know, at a young age I had an out-of-body experience where I left my body, and it became quite apparent to me while I was having this experience that I was thinking, but my brain was back in my body, which I could see in my bed. I knew it wasn't just a dream because I floated out over the ground outside my family's house, and I saw a book lying on the ground, and it was a book by the French short story writer Guy de Maupassant. And the next day, a neighbor said, "By the way, Michael, I lost a library book by Guy de Maupassant. Have you seen it?" And I thought, well, I floated over it last night. I didn't tell the neighbor that, but there was the book. And I was always I'm still very scientifically oriented. I want to understand the world in scientific terms. But it was really the first time that I sort of had to confront, you know, the difference between my spiritual beliefs that we can survive, you know, our bodily death, and this deeply held belief, scientific belief of mine that it's the brain that's doing the thinking. And I realized I had a kind of epiphany where I thought it isn't the brain that's doing the thinking. So I am not entirely certain that it's just the electromagnetic interference patterns that is the brain hologram, because those obviously would perish when the brain perishes. I think there might be some subtler level, some subtler energy that we haven't discovered with our technology that's involved in this also.
Well, Bohm's model is relevant and interesting at this point because he's not dealing with the universe as a hologram made out of electromagnetic interference patterns. He's looking at quantum wave potentials, which are at a much deeper level. And I must say, I've heard Pribram discuss it much the same way. There are quantum wave potentials in the brain itself, which is a much more deeply embedded level of energy and matter than the electromagnetic level.
Right. Bohm, it's a funny thing in science. The great physicist Hermann Bondi called it the lure of completeness, that we tend, when we find some sort of outermost perimeter to what we can measure, we assume there's nothing beyond it. And I refer to it, it's kind of like you know, in ancient times when we only knew a certain portion of the world, people always seem to say beyond the edge of the map there be monsters, that there was nothing there. And the same thing is going on in physics, that we have, with our technology, reached down to a certain level in reality, and it's a common prejudice among many physicists that beyond that level, there's nothing exists. There be monsters. There's just a void. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing that we, as I say, we have to have this lure of completeness. We have to feel that our knowledge of the universe is all that exists in the universe. Bohm, I think, is very wisely is one of the few physicists who comes out and kind of says the emperor has no clothes, says, what rational basis to it's just prejudice that we assume nothing exists beyond this level of reality. And he feels that there are all kinds of domains of reality beyond this level, this microscopic level, and he theorizes that there may be untold, uncountable, subtler energies in these levels. The quantum potential is one. It's a theorized field that has not been measured or discovered with science, but Bohm feels there's evidence to posit its existence.
And so one of the main principles of holonomic brain theory, which gets us into quantum mechanics also, is that there is a relationship here between what we ordinarily experience and some other process or some other order, which David Bohm calls the implicate or enfolded order, in which things are all distributed or spread. And in fact, the mathematical formulations are often called spread functions that spread this out.
Now, what you're talking about here is the deep structure of the universe, in a way, beneath the subatomic level, virtually.
That's right.
Of matter itself are these quantum wave functions, so to speak, and they
right.
form interference patterns. Would I be wrong in saying it would be like dropping two stones in a pond, the way the ripples overlap? And is that like
certainly
an interference?
That's certainly the way interference patterns are made.
And
you are energy, experiencing life through a human flesh shell vessel. You are information inside of the metamorphic matrix. The metamorphic matrix, or hollow movement, is a system inside of a system inside of a system, and each system is a symptom of the whole hollow movement system. All things are passing through the simultaneous interconnected happening. The medium is the message, and each message is one medium inside this information loop. Now, let's look at dimensional entanglement, because the quantum world is a field or system, not some kind of end-all be-all interpretation of each thing in itself. And each system, the electromagnetic spectrum, cellular field, atoms, particles, etc., is a symptom of the whole system. The whole system may be the known properties we've abstracted from the mind-matter interface or experience. Therefore, the individual parts are side effects of being, because we are finite expressions of the infinite process. For humans, conclusions tend to be coping strategies. Space is not empty, and you are one system inside of many systems, and like water, you are shaped by each medium.
I wanted flesh and blood, skin and bones, a multi-dimensional universal home. I want space and time, up and down, life and death, love all around. I knew there'd be trouble, but I could pull through. So I thought of the world, and you did too.
Suggesting that at that very deep level of reality, something is operating in the brain itself.
Well, no.
Okay.
In a way, that's possible, but that's not where the situation is at the moment.
Okay.
All we know is that the mathematical descriptions that we make of, let's say, single cell processes and the branches from the single cells and how they interact with each other, not only anatomically but actually functional interactions, that when we map those, we get a description that is very similar to the description of quantum events.
When you take into account that there are billions of these single cells
That's right.
operating in the brain.
And the connections between them. So there are even more, there are trillions of connections between them, and they operate on the basic principles that have been found to also operate at quantum level. Actually, it was the other way around. That the mathematics that Gabor used, he borrowed from Heisenberg and Hilbert, who developed them first in mathematics for Hilbert, and then Heisenberg used it in quantum mechanics, and then Gabor used it in psychophysics, and we've used it in modeling how brain networks work.
So, in other words, in the brain, when we look at the electrical impulses traveling through the neurons and the patterns as these billions of neurons interact, you would say that that is analogous, I suppose, or isomorphic to the processes that are going on at the deeper quantum level.
Yes, but we don't know that it's a deeper quantum level. I mean, in the brain, it's just it's analogous.
That may or may not be the case.
Yeah, analogous isn't quite the right word. They obey the same rules. They obey the same rules. It's not just an analogy, because the work that described these came independently of. See, an analogy would be that you take the quantum ideas and see how they fit to the brain, the data we have on the brain. And that's not the way it happened. We got the brain data first, and then we see, look, it fits the same mathematics. So the people who are gathering these data, including myself, weren't out to look for an analogous process. And I think it's a very important point, because otherwise you could be biased, and there are lots of different models that fit how the brain works. But this is more based on how the brain was found to work independent of these conceptions.
Hey, it's Bakian from Pale Talk. I got a question for you, Chris. Do you believe in a personal or an impersonal God? And can you give a reason as to why you hold to that position?
Well, I believe that there's a mapping between God and secondary images of God in this universe, and it is a one-to-many mapping. So on the many end of the mapping, that is in the codomain of the mapping, God is personal. On the other end of the mapping, God is impersonal in the sense that he has a personal relationship with all of his images. Right? So in a way, you can characterize his state as being an intersect of all of those images.
Oh, okay, so you hold on to a similar view that the Hindus do, that there's the Brahman, the impersonal source, and then perhaps like a lord like a Yahweh or a Shiva that is kind of like a personality?
What I'm saying is that God is essentially personal because God is projecting himself into each person. You understand, God is being realized as each individual person, and to this extent, God is very, very definitely personal. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that we each have we each have an aspect of God inside us. That doesn't necessarily mean we are God, because of course we're only localized here. We're only a partial aspect of God. But to the extent that we are, up to isomorphism, equivalent to God in the sense of this mapping, then yes, God is absolutely personal. And it's like I say, your soul is a connection to the unary identity of the universe, so you can be retracted up to the Godhead itself, which would seem to indicate that it's not all that impersonal. I mean, if a personal human being, if the codomain of the mapping can be retracted into the domain, then the personalities of which it consists can also be retracted into the domain, and that means that God is personal.
Okay, well, let me word it this way. Do you believe that there's a God that hears prayer, that can communicate with people in a language that they know, that cares about what we do in our life, that has a purpose for us? Do you believe in this type of God?
You better believe I do. Absolutely, I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But I also believe in Einstein's God. There is this idea of a God of nature, and I believe in that God too. I believe in both of them, and the fact that God has both of these aspects is how he is defined in the CTMU. There turns out to be no logical contradiction there, by the way. It's all perfectly consistent.
Okay. Can we have a personal relationship with this God apart from the blood of Jesus Christ?
Absolutely. There is no doubt about that. You can interpret the entirety of Christian scripture in the CTMU. You can also do that for other religions, interestingly enough. That's what makes the CTMU theologically special.
All right, thanks for taking my question. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Who can find the unforgettable? The one that is looking is mind. Mind only knows comings and goings. Mind cannot find that permanent state, because mind is exempt from the permanent state, because nothing happens in the permanent state. When you look into God's eyes, you're not thinking about what you're going to have to lunch the next day or what you did 10 years ago at the school sports. Permanence means no movement. No movement. Permanent. No differences between emotions, senses. No differences between experiences. Because when you start walking, your attention is no longer on the walking. It is on God's eyes. You see? So the one who's looking for permanence, as permanence, cannot be mind. Because mind wants to take you to the walking. Mind wants you to take you to the beautiful girl that's walking by. And quite rightfully so. That's mind's job. Mind's job is to keep you moving. Keep you coming and going. Keep showing you, revealing you this beautiful world, this beautiful life. Pain. When you accept the deal, when you took the ticket, you took the ticket to everything, you see. Oh, I didn't want pain. No. The forgetful is a permanent one. The permanent one knows no differences between pain and pleasure. You see? Now you don't want to look anymore. No more seeking, no more searching. Very good. You can walk around and say, I'm permanent. I'm permanent. And everyone's going to say, you know what? You're a fool. You're mentally deluded. You're moving. How could you be permanent? You're going to die. No, not my body. The me inside is permanent. What are you talking about, you raving lunatic? No one, even the master, will accept the disciple's description of what is experienced, no matter how wonderful, how blissful, and how new the experience is. Because even meeting the most ultimate experience something is going to forget it. Mind. It's going to be a vague memory. But something will remain as it. The unforgettable. So who can see themselves as unforgettable, and what do I look like, and where can I start? That is the whole purpose of being here. Every time since you've been born, someone has given you a clue, a hint. Until you're so reliable on the mind, so reliable on other minds, that you don't know where to start. So you have to start at the beginning, you see. Everyone wants to know what the future is, where his body will end up, and where the one inside will end up. No one is interested in where this body came from, who is looking for the unforgettable, what do I look like, where am I looking from, can I be seen, am I form or am I formlessness, what is my name, my true name, what is my true purpose. Everyone is looking for that to come, because mind says, I'll show you in a moment. It's coming. It's coming. Oh, sorry, not that one. That's gone. More. Mind doesn't want you to know. So how can you do it? Very simple. The space between the mind, the thoughts, the breath. There's no comings and goings. Yeah? When you breathe in, birth, out, death. What happened in the middle? In, space. Does the mind work in that space? Does the mind tell you stories in that space? Does the mind look at beautiful girls in that space? Does the mind try and remember the past, the unforgettable moments in that space? The mind doesn't know anything except that space. And that space is the space through. The space between the thoughts, the space between the breath, the space between waking and sleeping, the space between the on-off light. When it's on, it's on. When it's off, it's off. What happens when it's neither? The in-between space is the stateless space. And you say it's tiny. That's because mind is controlling you. See, mind is saying, I'm not showing him the in-between state, that space that I am exempt from. I'm not doing it. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to keep this one coming and going and coming and going. Keep reappearing as a new body. Keep experiencing, because my job is for this one to see everything in this life and learn about everything in this life. And it's doing a great job and it's wonderful. But for those few who are struggling with depression and stress and anxiety, and they think the whole world is against them, this video is for you. To stop. You are in the rightful place, you see. Those who are just loving this world and getting on with it and accepting things, there are more to see for these ones. It's not about who sees God first. It's about who has learned enough to see God first. In between your depression, the moment you feel a small break, stay there, you see. Keep your eyes on this one. This is God. When you're breathing, and if you miss it between the in and the out breath, there's a space between the next in, out and in breath. And in, out, shake it all about. You see? Breath does not cease. It's not only one in and one out. Breath is in, out, in, out, in, out. You see, flat line is space. And still here, breathing. You see? elongate the space with practice, with meditation, and straight through. And on the other side, God. What do you say? Wow. God says, you're blessed, son. Go back. Enjoy. Now you have seen something unforgettable. What is the unforgettable? It's not God. It's not yourself. It's not angels. The unforgettable is a space, the in-between space that stays with you. And everything on either side is simply, well, I used to think it was important. It's not important. It's not important anymore. But it is, as long as I want to be here in a body. I am this in-between space, this in-between state, this stateless state, this placeless place. I am that, you see. And I can appear both sides. I can experience both sides. I can be both sides. These are the comings and goings. But the unforgettable is myself as that. And that I am. Namaste.
I'm wondering how you see the role of our educational system, what it's doing right now, what forces are driving it, and what constraints are on it, and how should it operate. Mm-hmm. Well, I quoted the Trilateral Commission view of the educational system, namely it's a system of indoctrination of the young.
It's a system of indoctrination of the young.
And I think that's correct. It's a system of indoctrination of the young. That was the way the liberal elites regard it, and they're more or less accurate. So the educational system is supposed to train people to be obedient, conformist, not think too much, do what you're told, stay passive, don't cause any crisis of democracy. Don't
Obedient, conformist, not think too much, do what you're told, stay passive, don't cause any crises of democracy, don't
raise any questions, and so on. That's basically what the system is about. Even the fact that the system has a lot of stupidity in it, I think, has a function. You know, it means that people are filtered out for obedience. If you can guarantee lots of stupidity in the educational system, you know, like stupid assignments and things like that, you know that the only people who make it through are people like me and like most of you, I guess, who are willing to do it no matter how stupid it is, because we want to go to the next step, you know. So you may know that this assignment is idiotic and the guy up there couldn't think his way out of a paper bag, but you'll do it anyway because that's the way you get to the next class, and you want to make it and so on and so forth. Well, there are people who don't do that, you know. There are people who say, I'm not going to do it, it's too ridiculous, you know.
And you want to make it and so on and so forth. Well, there are people who don't do that, you know. There are people who say, I'm not going to do it, it's too ridiculous, you know.
PhD. My PhD. I remember doing PhD at university. There was nothing about me. Nothing about what I thought. It was about taking knowledge, past and new knowledge, to come up with another idea. You call it conclusion, it is simply another idea. That's all it is. You are trying to have the best idea in the world. I'll leave an idea. You see, what I'm going to do when I leave this body, when I go out of this and die, I want to leave an idea. So they can say, yeah, that one had an idea. It was a great idea. And what happened was, another 100 people after that, 7 centuries down the line, took that idea and made greater ideas from it. Ideas. You call it conclusions. What is the conclusion? What is the conclusion of this? What is the conclusion when your body goes? You don't know that one, you see. No one knows that one. I beg to differ. No one speaks about that one. The one that knows that one does not speak about that one. Because there's no one to speak about that one. Because that one has realized that nothing is actually taking place here. It's just an idea. It's just a thought. Your body and mind is the result of a thought from yourself. See? Poor me, I don't want to be a thought from God. No, you are God, you see. That's what you don't like to hear. You don't like to hear things like that. You are the result. Your body and mind is the result of a thought that you had. I want to see myself as a body and a mind. I don't know who I am, so I want to see who I am. And what I'm going to do, when I give myself a body and mind, I'm going to invent glass so that I can see in the mirror. I'm going to invent lakes so I can see in the lake. I'm going to invent shadows so I can see in the shadows. I'm going to invent other people so I can see in the other people. A reflection, a version of what I am. You look at a tree, that's you. You look at this laptop, that's you. You look at the one speaking, that's you. You look at the one listening, that's me. Me and you, same. Space, it's where the looking is taking place, not here in physical presence. The looking is taking place at the midpoint. When you stop listening and I stop speaking, silence. Meeting. Mind says, what? I need in. No, I want to come in. Stop it. Mr. Mind says, stop it. I was gone for a moment. Don't do that to me again, says Mr. Mind. Don't do that. Namaste.
I'm also revamping my history of the trivium for publication, and the trivium is grammar, logic, rhetoric, talking about basics. And grammar, by the way, is one of the ground things that gets pulled out of by the logicians. Always pull out the grammar ground and throw it away. Grammatica, by the way, means reading the book of nature, reading the whole text of nature as a book. That was called grammatica.
Boy, has that ever changed? Grammarians pay no attention whatsoever to the whole text of nature now. It's totally an abstract business, isn't it?
Well, no, it's. I think we're coming back more and more to it, very much. But the idea of taking total field theory. Field theory in physics is book of nature. Interdisciplinary is book of nature. Not allowing specialism to take over. But grammar, logic, rhetoric had been from the ancient times a sort of basic curriculum concerned with eloquence and with the word, the logos. And the study of the word as resonating with wisdom and incidentally resonating with therapeutic power goes way back. There's a book by Antralgo called The Therapy of the Word in Classical Antiquity. They used Tralgo.
I forget.
He's a medical historian. Therapy of the Word.
The word.
That is a basic book like Havelock, Preface to Plato. Therapy of the Word concerns the work of the witch doctors and the shamans who did cast the spells and so on, help people to get well. And the spells were cast in various art forms, lyric, epic, dramatic. Odes and so on were all part of the shaman's equipment. The genre of what we call the genre of literature began in the spells cast by witch doctors, the shamans. And eloquence was thought of as having the power to heal sick minds. The whole idea of eloquence in Cicero's De Oratore is the idea of wholeness, healing. And the therapy of the word was this is of course especially true of Christianity. The whole idea of the word, the divine word as healing. The Logos was thought of as therapeutic. And it was thought of as most therapeutic when sung and performed richly, so in opera and so on.
There's a book out called Poetry as a Therapeutic Experience.
Yeah?
The editor's L-E-R-N-E-R.
L-E-R-N-E-R, like Max Lerner, the same name?
Right. Arthur.
Arthur Lerner. Make a note. The poetry as therapeutic. Ezra Pound had a phrase, as the poets are the antennae of the race.
Only for those that can see it. The iPhone is an anagram for the phoenix. I'm a woodwind instrument repairman, dashing, handsome and daring, a Tuskegee airman. Reduce my ground speed to get it underground what they need. If they don't know what to believe, then I don't know what to tell them. Bliss ignorance is a weapon, illusions in the middle of the desert. Or in a sanctuary city, I stand corrected. It's all connected. Take an alter exit, move on to the next shit.
Meaning they pick up the messages first. They are the means of orientation in a crazy world. They can tune you in on situations by adjusting their rhythms.
They say the devil's time is short, so what's sport? We still ain't free. They still lying on radio and TV. The centuries turn into minutes. Humanity's finished. Forced organ hoggers, what's for dinner?
Butcher the meat, chop up the pig, dig out the ribcage, Blue Mountain Ridge, fire burn hot, I tell another pot. Woman head wrap up, she rock round in a frog budget. What among maroon sing song? How long you there, foreign in a Babylon belly man?
And perform absolutely necessary functions for the society.
Anticipate then, for example, the forms which lie ahead, the structures, the interconnections, and if you're sensitive to what the artist is doing and can dig it, you've got a leg up on finding out where we may be or be going.
Yes, the painter or the poet should be able to give you at least a 30 years warning on where you are headed, because they pick up the messages that much earlier, at least a generation before the establishment or the bureaucracy.
Is this thing working? Is this thing on?
In a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression
that we were reliving the present. Deja vu.
That we were reliving the present.
Wake up.
We can't let it end like this. If we fail, all that'll be left is dust.
Everyone I've talked to lately, they've been noticing. Something's wrong. Something's going to happen. And everybody's afraid. Everyone, Dad, why?
People are afraid because they make themselves afraid.
Fear is the trumpet devil played before they war can't be beat with a sword but a stick of all war. fear can make a man motivate a million more to kill a million other men, to protect a million more. It was designed to be a fuel. Now it's used as a tool or abused by ruthless men to prove that minds are fools who threw away the jewels. Only infinity and proves the substratum of reality begins with what we choose. There's always more in store. There's always other doors. Put it all on the line. You can always find more. And everything we can see is not the only thing here. It's clear to me. Greed just another form of fear. Greed can make a man cheat his brothers from the stars. Greed can make a man abandon all wise thought for. Greed can change a man from a king to a pawn. Yes, greed can make a man do anything you want. If you got no heart and you got plenty of ends, there's no limit to your power if you're willing to spend. But the weakness of this type of man is easy to spot for. As free as he feels, he always fears it will be lost.
The man in jail is always free. Except if you'll excuse me, I'm not in jail. You're in jail. You're a prisoner of your own fears, your own greed and ambition. You're in jail.
I want to think. I don't know what to do. I want to think and people won't let me.
I found the cause of my ignorance.
Once you change your philosophy, you change your thought pattern. Once you change your thought pattern, you change your attitude. Once you change your attitude, it changes your behavior pattern. And then you go on into some action.
Keep your ears on my rhymes, a word to the wise. The truth don't hide between lies, let it come as no surprise. They speaking black magic lines, reverse the word's meaning. You can read the leader's lies, but change is beginning. Lyrics imitate art. How long can a man walk a path with no heart before he taken by the dark and his soul grows colder than the snows of the Arctic when the love of life is lost? But life reflects thought, thought reflects life. Art reflects both. That's the reason I write. Try to keep my mind right through the soul's dark night. For all dark things must be afforded light.
So you think you love the broad mass of mankind? You know nothing of love. You give $2 to a strike fund and you think you've done your duty? You poor fools. No gift is worth a damn unless it's the most precious thing you've got.
Once you promise to do it, don't finagle around. It's later than you think.
They run our slave race at an unrelenting pace to keep the populace locked in a very cold place. Looking for paradise on earth when it exists in the heart. The secret to creativity's finishing what you start. We have absolutely no time to waste. The rhymes are in place to open internal doors where infinity away. The future seems grim cause the earth is in hell. But in the world will not end in the year 2012. We survive pole shifts and we survive the flood. If we lose it all again, it's cause we first lost love. Let's make a new system. I know we can do it better. We build this world separate, imagine what we could build together. However, the will is what's created. Love make it sacred, nothing good comes from hatred. Love the missing link to connect what we think to the source of God's arts. Therefore, I do not think that they can still divide us. If wise thought guide us, when we activate the latent powers that reside inside us, called upon and generated by the heart. It's time to press reset or graduate to the stars.
My mind doesn't seem to be my own. I think about things that a man like me shouldn't bother himself about. I worry about people. It's sickening that I have ruined my life because of worrying about people. I feel that I want to take every human being on this earth by the shoulders, shake them roughly and say, listen, Pastor, there is more to this earth than you think.
Spaceship Earth, but his purpose has never been seeking fortune or fame.
The world isn't working for everybody. Why isn't it?
Because they're trying to solve all the world problems with politics. And politics is based on very good policy. How do you cope with the fundamental inadequacy of life support on our planet? And all the great model of all economics is nowhere nearly enough to go around. This is completely ignorant of what you can do with modern technology. But we have the option now to make it, to take care of all humanity, the highest standard anybody's ever known. The whole game is being able to see our whole Earth at once. With a beautiful map without any distortion, a relative shape of size of the parts. As a basic background, there's one world island and one world ocean. And on that, we're then able to show where all the different resources are. We have to show where all the people are. We have to show where all the possible artifacts are that might be developed.
At a recent World Games session at U.S. International University in San Diego, one of the World Game players knew well how small and fragile the world can look. Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut from the first moon landing. We have the technology available to give everyone on Earth the highest standard of living in history, or we can destroy ourselves. At the end of the session, thousands of red chips are scattered over the map. One chip for each nuclear bomb in the world today. Buckminster Fuller has proved his point. Thick glasses and hearing aids keeps moving around the world, quietly helping us see things as they are and as they could be.
And the world impoverishes itself by spending $1 trillion a year on preparations for war, and by employing perhaps half the scientists and high technologists on the planet in military endeavors. How would we explain all this to a dispassionate extraterrestrial observer? What account would we give of our stewardship of the planet Earth? We have heard the rationales offered by the superpowers. We know who speaks for the nations, but who speaks for the human species? Who speaks for Earth? From an extraterrestrial perspective, our global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure in the most important task it faces, preserving the lives and well-being of its citizens and the future habitability of the planet. But if we're willing to live with the growing likelihood of nuclear war, shouldn't we also be willing to explore vigorously every possible means to prevent nuclear war? Shouldn't we consider in every nation major changes in the traditional ways of doing things, a fundamental restructuring of economic, political, social, and religious institutions? We've reached a point where there can be no more special interests or special cases. Nuclear arms threaten every person on the Earth. Fundamental changes in society are sometimes labeled impractical or contrary to human nature, as if nuclear war were practical, or as if there were only one human nature. But fundamental changes can clearly be made. We're surrounded by them. In the last 2 centuries, abject slavery, which was with us for thousands of years, has almost entirely been eliminated in a stirring worldwide revolution. Women, systematically mistreated for millennia, are gradually gaining the political and economic power traditionally denied to them. And some wars of aggression have recently been stopped or curtailed because of a revulsion felt by the people in the aggressor nations. The old appeals to racial, sexual, and religious chauvinism and to rabid nationalist fervor are beginning not to work. A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed.
A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. We are one planet.